People who knew famous serial killers, criminals before they were caught. What were they like? He was a loner in one of the biggest schools in the state. He wasn't weird or creepy or smelly or anything, but the popular kids would pick on him. He was friends with my GF. We were going to hang out one weekend, but he bludgeoned his mother to death and ran away with his GF. You make sound so normal. Oh yeah, that guy. We were gonna chill once, but he killed his mom and ran away with his girl instead. About 10 years before he murdered 2 young women, he came to our house. He was about 16 or 17, on his bicycle with a chipmunk he had hung with a rope and was swinging it around and acting weird. My brother and I were home alone, and it was one time I know my brother was scared. We kept the doors locked. He peed in our grill and left. The whole time he was yelling, but I'm not sure it was at us. There is nothing normal about any of those sentences. A guy I work with used to carpool to school with Aaron Hernandez. Spent a summer in Ames, Iowa with some family. Jeffrey Dahmer was a neighbor, a family friend. My cousin and I built a haunted house out of a playhouse in the backyard. Mostly we blindfolded the neighborhood kids and led them through. We had a bowl of grapes with some oil on them and shoved the kids' hands into it and told it was eyeballs. We formed cold congealed spaghetti into what we told them were brains. I personally led Jeffrey through, and every time someone says his name I wonder if I was the cause of his problems. I am probably relatively unique in that I know 3 people on death row, and 1 other murderer. 1 complete horrible human being threatened my life in high school, and I always figured he would kill someone in a bar fight. Instead, him and 2 friends went and he had one of them kill the husband, while he chased the wife down and shot her in the back. I was called to testify for the prosecution at his last death penalty trial. He was huge and scary as heck, and a truly horrible human being. Based on the testimony I heard, he still is. 2 kind of odd guy, but pretty nice. I played Starfleet battles with him. Him and a friend killed a lady. No idea why. He seemed more of a follower than a leader, and that's pretty much how the murder went down. Still on death row. 3 another guy was more friends with my ex-wife. He even watched our kids a couple times. Quiet and seemed friendly. 4 I knew this kid in high school. He was pretty quiet, read westerns a lot. Being a big book reader, I chatted a few times. He seemed very nice. One day he took a shotgun to school and at lunch shot the guy convicted of molesting his brother. He ended up getting a slap on the wrist for it. I felt he should have gotten a medal knowing the details that came out. I suspect the judge gave him the least he could. I knew 2. They both grew up next door to one another. One had emotional problems, but could be a decent guy one-on-one. We hung out a bit and rode bikes occasionally. He killed a guy in a drug deal and stuffed the body down a well. The other was a great guy, but didn't give a frick about anyone outside of his circle of friends and his family. We hunted and fished together every day. He once told me he wouldn't feel remorse if he killed someone outside his family. I thought it was just talk. This year his sister's husband started beating her. He ambushed him in a country road and shot him to death. Still a decent guy in my book. Justified. My cousin went to school with Timothy McVeigh. She says he was a really creepy loner who would talk about conspiracy theories all the time. That's weird. My old roommate said the opposite. She didn't have creepy or odd stories at all, and it wasn't a massive high school. Not me, but a buddy of mine was friends with the Boston bomber at UMass Dartmouth. He says they used to hang out, drink and do normal college stuff together. One of those you'd never expect it kind of situations. The thing that still gets me is that when he fled the scene, he briefly went back to Dartmouth to do whatever he had to do, but while there, he hit the gym with my buddy and the story was all over every news outlet on TV. He turns to my buddy at the gym and proceeds to tell him how could anybody do something like this. I dated someone who murdered a guy with his friends. It was personal. It did make national news. A few months after we broke up, I was dating someone else. He called me and said that he was never going to be with me because he messed everything up. I was busy and I blew him off. A week later, after a holiday, I got a call from the jail, but it was like 4 o'clock in the morning and I accidentally hung up. A few years later, I looked him up and realized the call was him. I am afraid that he holds a grudge, and as his release creeps closer, I worry. So, what was he like before? Melodramatic. After we broke up, He called me and played Cry Me a River and told me that we were just like the song. He beat himself up a lot. Everything was a big deal. We argued a lot. He was easily influenced. He didn't have a good relationship with his parents, so his friends were all he had. He had a history of disciplinary actions in school. Respect was a huge thing. Feeling disrespected to him was the worst thing in the world. He didn't care about school. He was funny. Ouch. Asked to be notified of his release. Also, change your name and move cause. Yeah, wow. This guy isn't famous. Not yet anyway. All this just happened maybe a month ago, maybe a little longer. Guy's name is Adam Dean Small. He killed his girlfriend and dismembered her. He put the body in a couple of suitcases and took their 1-year-old daughter on the road. I always thought he was an intelligent guy, but apparently he wasn't the smartest, as he immediately drove from where he was living in Colorado to his hometown in NW, Louisiana, straight to his parents' house. He dropped the suitcases in 2 separate locations along the way. Someone found one of them and he was arrested. As far as I know, they still haven't found the other suitcase. I knew him, but not very well. We used to frequent the same bar. He would sit in the corner with a beer and read. He was rude to anyone who tried to speak to him. Had that whole "can't you see I'm reading" attitude. In most cases I understand that attitude, but not in a bar. Never made sense to me. We talked a few times, but only talked at length once. I remember it being an enjoyable conversation. He was intelligent and well spoken. Also a good looking guy, but not exactly charming. One thing I remember is he would say "gods" in place of "oh my god." I know he lives somewhere near me because I would see him walking around the neighborhood on occasion with a big walking stick. So yeah, he was a bit of a strange guy, but I was shocked when I heard about the murder. It still feels weird to realize I know someone who could do something like that. Obligatory not me, but my mom saw Ted Bundy running through the woods after he escaped prison. They realized who it was after the cops came searching door to door. Not directly, but I know of several people who knew Willie Pickton before he was arrested. I often wonder if this guy is famous like Ted Bundy or Dahmer. Killed up to 49 women. Higher and proven count them both combined. Freaking psycho. Lived less than 50 kilometers from where I grew up as the crow flies. He had the demeanor and personality of a Reddit moderator. That gave me chills. Late to this, but I'll post anyway. Extended family member murdered 2 girls and was suspected of murdering another. He and his mother and siblings lived with us for a few months when we were very young children. So young I only have vague memories of this. It was while his mother was trying to leave her very abusive husband. He, the husband, was a real animal and probably had something to do with family member turning out the way he did. What was he like? As a young kid he was just your typical child, maybe enjoyed getting other people in trouble a bit more than most, but that's about it. As a teen and young adult, he was a very scary character. You would get a real menacing vibe from him, like he was completely unpredictable, which was strange because he always acted very calm. You just had this sense there was way more going on under the surface. As a family member I always felt safe around him. Strange to say that, I know, but I still always felt like he couldn't be trusted around others. Plus, even though instinctively I felt safe, rationally I knew I most likely wasn't, so I made sure I was never alone with him. You could tell there was something not quite right about him. We were all a little relieved when he died suddenly, still quite young. Eventually he would have paroled out and someone else would have died. Whoa, makes you wonder if people are born this way or if something happens to them to make them like that. I sat next to Jeffrey Dahmer at a bar in Milwaukee. I just wasn't his taste. JFC LMAO. I went to school with someone doing 15-34, killing his girlfriend's baby on Street Patty's Day because the baby wouldn't stop crying. He was nice. Heard his home life was pure crap though. He could lose his temper easy and had some issues in relationships, I heard. Was the star goalie on the lacrosse team too, winning a state championship. Sorry to be that guy, and I know this probably isn't the time or place, but it's actually Paddy's Day. Patty would be short for Patricia. Was in the same WoW guild as Anders Bering Breivik. He was pretty normal to me. Guy lived across the cul-de-sac from me. Really weird older fella. Hated when me or my brothers would climb the wall so we can get to the street faster. One time he gunned his van trying to hit my brother as he was hopping the wall. We stayed away from him at all cost. I don't think it ever made the papers, but apparently him and his buddy went out to the desert and only he came back. Week later he was arrested for the murder of his buddy. Don't know why he did it, what the motive was, but all we know was he shot him and left him about 3 miles from the nearest road. You should read the comic My Friend Dahmer. Chilling read and highlights. There were warning signs the adults missed. Yet weirdly, when the guy heard the news of a serial killer classmate, Dahmer was his second guess. There's a book I read by Anne Rule, The Stranger Beside Me. I found it to be a pretty interesting read. Apparently she was friends with Ted Bundy and knew him for a long time. The hash-slinging slasher used to be a pretty good dude. The BTK killer was a customer of mine for over a year before he was caught. I would help him almost every morning when he would come in and buy coffee. Seemed like a normal guy. Never thought to myself that this guy was a serial killer. He did like to talk a lot though about random things. This will get buried, but I have an interesting story. So, my best friend was murdered a few months ago by his brother-in-law. The guy is being charged with first-degree murder and the trial is in progress right now. Now for the story. A couple years ago, me and my buddy went to go pick up brother-in-law and his girlfriend for a night of pizza and Mario Kart. Brother-in-law decided he would meet up with us in a few hours, so his girl came with us for the time being. He met up with us later, and everything was good. About a week later I get a phone call from my buddy's brother-in-law. He's drunk. He somehow convinced himself that we had gangbanged his girl while he was gone, and he was on his way with a gun to kill me. At the time, I had no idea why I took a threat like that so seriously. Because of where I grew up, not much scares me, but I turned my lights out and left the house for the night. Thinking about that today, now knowing he murdered my best friend, it's really scary knowing that he could have been completely serious that night. Either way, the whole thing sucks. My boyfriend and his friend kidnapped 2 people, drove them out to a field, and shot them execution style. I had a roommate in the mid-90s who graduated from high school with Timothy McVeigh. Showed me the nice note he wrote in her yearbook. She had no scary or creepy stories at all. I went to a Catholic primary school, was reading something a few years ago. Turns out the local priest is now imprisoned for pedophilia. He was friendly and well liked, I think, but it might sort of explain my sudden change in schools at the time. TBH, I didn't really notice anything. My former co-worker knew Ted Bundy from a volunteer group in Washington state. Said that when he was around other people, he was handsome, charming and very polite. He'd offer to help if you needed it. Then she said towards the end of his time at the volunteer group he'd become more distant socially. She said he once offered her a ride home afterward, but that she declined cause she was being picked up by her parents that night. She didn't know what kind of killer he was until years later. She always said she missed the worst ride of her life that night. I knew a victim of the Shankill Butchers. I used to collect lottery money off him. I thought he was retarded. He was the last victim. They tortured him and dumped his body, but he survived. The police took him in an unmarked car through the neighborhood and he pointed them out. Whatever they done to him, he was never right again. He died a few years ago of heart failure. My grandpa went to high school with BTK. He said he was a weird guy, and after high school, he loved the power a uniform gave him, whether it was as a dog catcher or as a city official. He also said he never really liked Raider. It shocked him that he turned out to be a killer, but looking back, he said it made sense. I was locked up with Brian David Mitchell. Weird sucker would run trot in shackles while singing hymns during his rec time. I work with a lady whose one family member killed his wife with a hammer and shoved her body down a wood chipper. Gary M. Heednick used to frequent a bar popular with vets that my grandfather met his friends at a few times a month. He was usually quiet, and on Christmas Eve my grandfather's friend bought the guy a beer and talked to him for a few minutes, thinking he might be a guy with PTSD. Came back and said there is a screw loose with that guy. Few weeks later he got in a fight with someone and my grandfather helped the bartender throw him out. He never came back. Worked with Charlie Rathbun, who killed model Linda Sobek. They think he probably killed others but can't pin him down. Fun times. Jeffrey Franklin axed his whole family. My oldest sister went to high school with him. She said he brought her up to the mountain and did satanic rituals and whatnot. She got scared and never talked to him again after that, but knew him pretty well before he did that. Right after or during high school, a couple of trailer park kids, girl and guy, dating, plotted and killed the guy's parents, drove around with the bodies for a couple days and later buried them in a local park in town. Don't remember the story completely, but the guy worked in a LQ store I worked at a couple years after. From what I understand, he was a weird guy that kept to himself and acted like nothing happened for the most part. But then they began questioning all the employees about him when they had a hunch he did a bad thing. My childhood best friend helped her boyfriend kill his grandmother. She was such a good kid back in the day. Her life was so horrible though, it's like she never had a chance. My best friend lived next door to a guy who chopped up his wife and hid her around a state park. Her family went to many parties in his house. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.